Learning objectives. After completing this module, learners will be able to explain the similarities and differences between Bolivia and Nepal. Describe the role played by organizations. Explain the sectional interest groups and public interest groups. Discuss how pressure groups and movements influence politics. Describe the importance of movement and pressure group. Popular struggle in Nepal. The popular struggle in Nepal took place in April 2006 with an objective to restore its democracy. The Nepalese king Birendra had accepted the constitutional monarchy. Later in 2001, King Birendra was killed in a mysterious massacre of the royal family, and the new king of Nepal, King Gyanendra, was not prepared to accept democratic rule. In February 2005, the king dismissed the then Prime Minister and dissolved the popularly elected parliament. The main aim of the movement of April 2006 was to regain popular control over the government from the king. So, a seven-party alliance or SPA was formed by all the major political parties in the parliament, and later they called for a 4-day strike in Kathmandu. The Maoist, insurgents and various other organizations joined hands during this strike, which later turned into an indefinite strike. The number of protesters reached between 3 to 5 lakhs, and they were adamant with their demands for restoration of parliament. As a result, on 24th April, the king was forced to concede to their demands, and the seven-party alliance chose Girija Prasad Koirala as the new prime minister of the interim government. This struggle came to be known as Nepal's Second Movement for Democracy. Bolivia Water War. Bolivia is a poor country in Latin America. In Bolivia, the government was pressurized by the World Bank to give up the control of water supply. So under the pressure of World Bank, government sold the rights of water supply to a multinational company. As soon as the MNC got the right of water supply, they increased the price of water by 4 times. This brought troubles in lives of common people and led to a popular protest. So in January 2000, an alliance of labor human rights organization called for a 4-day strike in city. Hence, the government agreed to negotiate, but nothing happened. The struggle was started again in February and April. But the government tried to suppress the movement by imposing martial law. But the power of people forced the MNC to abscond the city and made the government to cancel the contract with MNC and restored the water supply. This incident is known as Bolivia Water War. Differences between Bolivia and Nepal. The movement in Nepal was to establish democracy, but movement in Bolivia was against the policy of an elected democratic government. The struggle in Nepal was about the foundation of country's politics, while struggle in Bolivia was not about one specific policy. Similarities between Bolivia and Nepal. Nepal and Bolivia both are examples of political disputes that led to popular struggles in both the countries. The struggle involved mass mobilization. Public demonstration of mass support concluded the conflict. Conclusion drawn from popular struggles of Nepal and Bolivia. Democracy expands through popular struggles, and it involves conflict between those who are in power and those who aspire for power. Democratic conflicts are resolved through mass mobilization, and if these conflicts cannot be resolved by Parliament, the solution will come from people. Democratic conflicts and mobilization are based on new political organization. Mobilization and organization. The seven-party alliance in Nepal included some big parties that had some members in the parliament, and it was also joined by Nepalese Communist Party, Maoist, for the mass recovery of Nepal. The struggle involved many organizations and the movement of joined by all the major labor unions and their federations. Many other organizations like teachers, the Organization of the Indigenous People, human rights groups and lawyers extended support to the movement. But the protest against water privatization in Bolivia was not led by any political party. Instead, it was led by an organization known as FEDECOR. This organization consisted of local professionals such as engineer, farmer, student, environmentalist, and even street children. This movement was supported by Socialist Party that came up in power in 2006. In a democratic country, many different kinds of organizations work behind a big struggle. These organizations play an important role in the following ways. By direct participation. In competitive politics, direct participation is done by creating political parties, contesting elections and forming government. By indirect participation, people force the government to fulfill their demand. This is done by forming organizations called interest groups or pressure groups. Pressure groups and movements. Pressure groups. Pressure groups are the organizations that tries to influence governmental policies. They do not aim to control or share political power. People with common occupation, interest, aspiration come together to achieve their common objective. Movements. Movements try to influence government policies instead of directly taking part in the electoral competition, and they have a loose organization with more flexible and informal decision-making than pressure groups. Sectional interest groups and public interest groups. Sectional interest groups seek to promote interest of only one section of the society, while the public interest groups seek to promote interest of society in general. Both the public interest groups and sectional interest groups are the types of pressure groups as they exert pressure over the government by holding rallies and protests to accept their demands. For example, BAMSEF or Backward and Minority Communities Employee Federation is an organization largely comprises of government employees who campaigns against the caste-based discrimination. The main concern of BAMSEF is social justice and social equality for entire society. Issue-specific and general movement. Issue-specific and general movement are the movements that try to achieve a single objective within a limited time. Example, Nepalese movement. Whereas general or generic movement are the movements that try to achieve a broad goal in a long time. Example, environmental movements. In India, Narmada Bachao Andolan is a good example of issue-specific and general movements. It started with specific issue of the people displaced by creation of Sardar Sarovar Dam on Narmada River. Its objective was to stop dam from being constructed gradually it becomes a wider movement that questioned all such big dams. Movements of this kind tend to have a clear leadership and some organization, while environmental movements and women's movement are examples of long-term movements. Here, no single organization controls or guides such movements. Example: the National Alliance of People's Movement is an organization of organizations. Influence of pressure groups and movements on politics. Pressure groups try to get public support and sympathy for their activities by carrying out information campaigns, organizing meetings, and filling politicians. They try to influence the media for their cause. They organize protest activity like strikes to create disruption in government programs. They influence decision-making by lobbying the legislatures. Pressure groups raise issues which influence the policies of political parties. Summary. Let us summarize what we have learned. Democracy involves conflicting interests and opinions. There are different ways through which ordinary citizen can play a role in democracy. Bolivia is a poor country in Latin America where the World Bank pressurized the government to give up the control of water supply. So, the government decided to sell the rights of water supply to MNC. The protest against water privatization in Bolivia was not led by a political party. It was led by an organization, FEDECOR. Pressure groups are the organization that tries to influence government policies. They do not aim to control or share political power. Sectional interest groups refer to the interest groups that seek to promote the interest of a particular section or a group of society. Trade unions, business associations, and professional bodies, lawyers, doctors, teachers, etc., are some examples of sectional interest groups. In India, Narmada Bachao Andolan is a good example of issue-specific and general movements. It started with specific issue of the people displaced by creation of Sardar Sarovar Dam on Narmada River. Environmental movements and women's movements are examples of long-term movements. In such movements, no single organization is present to control or guide the movements.